They say they don't make Mercedes like they used to, and they're absolutely right. Before touchscreens, turbos, and cost-cutting took over, these cars were engineered to survive decades, not just warranties. Today, we're counting down 9 old Mercedes that were truly built to last forever. Number 9. Mercedes-Benz C-Class W202. Do you know what shocked people the most when they went to buy the entry-level Mercedes in 1993? It felt way too good to be true. And in a second, you'll see exactly why. See, the W202 wasn't just another small luxury sedan, it was Mercedes's comeback kid. The 80s 190E had already proved that baby Benz could still feel premium, but by the 90s, it was time for an upgrade. Buyers wanted safety, style, and something that didn't look like it belonged in a Cold War movie. So Mercedes rolled up its sleeves and built a car that basically said, "Sure, we'll modernize, but we're not getting soft." And it worked beyond anyone's wildest imaginations. From 1993 to 2001, nearly 1.9 million W202s rolled off the line. Compact, safe, and refined. It was a global hit. But here's the crazy part. You can still find tons of them on the road today, quietly outliving newer cars that cost twice as much. And why wouldn't they? After all, the W202s weren't just well built. They were engineered during Mercedes's "we don't care about profit margins" era, when quality control was a religion, not a suggestion. This meant that everything about the car screamed overbuilt on top of its lungs. You could slam its doors 1,000 times, and they'd still close with that trademark Mercedes thud, a sound that should honestly be copyrighted. The buttons felt like they were carved from old Nokia phones. And even though the dashboard design looked like it was borrowed from a fax machine, it was all business. No gimmicks, no touchscreen tantrums, just rock-solid German logic. Most importantly, under the hood lived some of the most bulletproof engines Mercedes ever built. The M111 inline 4 was so over-engineered it could run on oil, water, or probably Red Bull if you were desperate. Then came the M104 inline 6, smooth as melted chocolate and nearly as addictive. And if you were smart enough to pick the diesels, the OM605 and OM606, congratulations, you basically signed up for a lifelong commitment. Those engines weren't just reliable, they were unstoppable forces of nature. And of course, no legend is perfect. Rust loved the W202 like mosquitoes love bare legs. Still, even when the body started dissolving like a sugar cube in tea, the engines kept humming, the transmissions kept shifting, and the interiors refused to give up. Number 8. Mercedes-Benz C-Class W204. If the early 2000s taught Mercedes anything, it's that you can't live off your reputation forever. See, the C-Class, the W203, became a universally hated Mercedes. Rust issues, electrical problems, and a general feeling that the Germans were cutting corners. So when it came to developing the W204, Mercedes engineers basically said, "All right, enough trolling. Time to remind the world why we're Mercedes-Benz." And boy, they did it the old-fashioned way, by over-engineering everything. How? Well, while rivals were still debating how light they could make their cars, Mercedes went the opposite direction. Make it heavy, make it safe, and make sure it survives a head-on collision with time itself. The result? The body was 70% high-strength steel and a chassis so solid that even some sports cars felt embarrassed. Safety became a selling point again too, with 7 airbags standard and optional extras for those who wanted to survive literally anything. But Mercedes didn't stop there. The suspension setup was mind-blowing stuff. A 3-link front suspension with twin lower arms, something usually reserved for high-end sports sedans. Most car makers would have gone with the cheaper option. Mercedes went with what felt right. Even better, higher trims got the Airmatic adaptive dampers, a luxury hand-me-down from the S-Class. It was technology that made zero financial sense, but it made the W204 glide like a baby S-Class. Step inside, and it felt like Mercedes had been writing an apology letter to everyone who complained about the last one. Gone were the flimsy plastics and sad trim pieces. Everything finally felt like it was made to outlive you. Even the wiring harnesses were beefed up, as if engineers were on a personal mission to erase every bad memory the W203 left behind. But what really cemented the W204's reputation was what sat under the hood. Mercedes dropped in engines that refused to die even decades later. The M271 and M272 engines, both smooth and stout, proved that Mercedes could still build bulletproof power plants in a world obsessed with downsizing. And for the diesel crowd, the OM646 and OM651 engines were so tough, they outlived entire taxi fleets and probably a few mechanics' careers. Number 7. Mercedes-Benz SL R129. Imagine a car so well built that even time itself seems afraid to mess with it. That's the Mercedes-Benz R129, the roadster that made reliability look sexy. When it debuted in 1989, the R129 wasn't just another convertible, it was a rolling engineering thesis put forward by the Germans. Mercedes had spent over a decade developing it, because back then, the brand's motto might as well have been, "If it ain't overbuilt, it ain't leaving Stuttgart." Therefore, everything about it was obsessive. The chassis, a fortress in disguise. The soft top, fully automatic and hydraulically operated. And safety, airbags, ABS, and stability control. Oh, and how can we forget that it had the groundbreaking pop-up rollover bar that deployed in just 0.3 seconds upon detecting a potential rollover? Honestly, it was both beauty and brains, built at a time when Mercedes didn't cut costs, they cut steel. And then, of course, there were the engines, the heart of why the R129 earned its Built to Last Forever badge. Mercedes gave it an entire buffet of indestructible power plants. The 3.0-liter inline sixes were downright bomb-proof, and the V8s, especially the M119 and M113, were masterpieces. Refined, muscular, and capable of clocking hundreds of thousands of miles without flinching. The 5.0-liter V8 especially, a grunty, overbuilt masterpiece that might just deserve the title Best Engine Ever Made. And Mercedes knew engines alone wouldn't make the R129 immortal, so they went with multi-link suspension, which was a stroke of genius, softly sprung for comfort, but firmly damped for control. You could glide over a pothole at 80 miles per hour and still feel like you were driving through melted butter. It was that rare balance of precision and poise that modern cars try, and usually fail, to replicate. But if you think the R129 was a masterpiece of its time, wait until you meet the car that made the world start to take German engineering more seriously. Number 6. Mercedes-Benz W114. Every great legend has an origin story, and for Mercedes reliability, the W114 is where it all began. See, before the W123 became the face of German reliability, there was the W114. The car that laid down the blueprint for what Built to Last Forever actually meant. Produced between 1968 and 1976, this was the great-grandmother of today's E-Class, and the reason your uncle still won't shut up about how they don't make them like they used to. Mercedes didn't build the W114 to compete with other automakers. They wanted to destroy them, which is why it was over-engineered to the extreme extent of almost insanity. For example, the W114 introduced a diagonal swing rear axle that gave it the smoothest ride of its time, plus four-wheel disc brakes, something muscle cars with triple the power didn't even bother with. It rode like a diplomat's limo, handled like it was glued to the road, and braked like it had psychic powers. Most importantly, this was the car that introduced one of the most legendary diesel engines in history, the OM6 175-cylinder, known to fans as the 300D. It debuted in 1974, and it was everything you could want in an engine. Smooth, torquey, and nearly unkillable. And while most people drooled over that diesel, the 250 and 286 cylinders brought luxury and power to the party. These weren't engines, they were symphonies in straight six. Effortless torque, velvet smoothness, and the kind of durability that made you believe German engineers were using magic to create this masterpiece. And what about safety? Well, the W114 was decades ahead. It had headrests, soft steering wheels, headlight wipers, and those ribbed taillights that actually stayed visible when covered in dirt. Small touches that made big differences when other car makers were still putting chrome over crumple zones. The W114 didn't try to be iconic. It just was. No hype, no gimmicks, just solid engineering and real materials. Number 5. Mercedes-Benz S-Class W116. Did you know the Mercedes-Benz S-Class W116 was the first model ever to officially wear the S-Class badge? It debuted in 1972, And that S stood for Sonderklasse, German for special class. And that's not just marketing talk. This thing really was special for all the good reasons. You see, back in the early 70s, Mercedes wasn't interested in making pretty cars anymore. They wanted to make important cars. Cars that could survive dictators, outlast economic crises, and make every other luxury sedan feel like cheap furniture. And the W116 was their declaration of dominance. From the moment you saw its boxy shape and serious face, you nodded your hat in appreciation. But here's the best part. This car wasn't just about looking expensive. It was Mercedes flexing its engineering ego like never before. The W116 introduced things no one else even dreamed of back then. Crumple zones, reinforced passenger cells, and the first ever anti-lock braking system, ABS, in a production car. In an era where most cars had dashboards made of steel and bad ideas, Mercedes was padding everything for safety. Even the steering wheel was designed so it wouldn't try to kill you in a crash. Oh, and how can we forget that the 1978 Mercedes-Benz 300 SD W116 was the first ever production car with a turbo diesel engine? And if you think the safety obsession was impressive, wait till you get under the hood. Mercedes didn't build engines for horsepower bragging rights, they built them for immortality. The M110 inline-six was so durable you could run it on bad fuel in the middle of nowhere and it would still hum like an old jazz record. Then came the 450 SEL 6.9, a V8 so massive and smooth it basically invented the phrase gentle giant. It was quiet, refined, and could still leave sports cars sweating at the lights, all while you sat in leather chairs softer than your therapist's couch. But what really makes the W116 feel eternal is how it drives. Mercedes didn't just throw luxury at it, they engineered an experience. Thanks to its hydropneumatic suspension, the car didn't glide over the road, it hovered. Potholes didn't exist. Bumps, optional. It was like being chauffeured by physics itself. The W116 was also built during that beautiful pre-cost-cutting era when Mercedes engineers were like bosses. They chased only perfection, and you can feel it. Number 4. Mercedes-Benz S-Class W126. If the car world had an Olympics for build quality, the W126 S-Class wouldn't just win gold. It'd retire the sport altogether. Built from 1979 to 1991, this wasn't just Mercedes flexing. It was Mercedes saying, "We make tanks, but with leather seats." When it debuted in 1979, the world was still reeling from oil crises, recessions, and questionable hairstyles. Other automakers were busy cutting weight, cutting power, and cutting costs. Mercedes? They decided to cut none of that. Just noise, vibration, and anything that didn't feel like pure class. The engineers were basically told, build a car so good, world leaders will prefer it over any other car out there. And they did. Literally. The W126 became the unofficial transport for presidents, CEOs, and anyone who thought a private jet was too much effort. And honestly, Mercedes didn't treat the W126 like a new model. They treated it like a scientific experiment in how long a car could physically last. Engineers obsessed over everything. Aerodynamics, corrosion resistance, even door seals. They spent 7 years developing it before launch, which in car years is like raising a child before introducing them to society. The result? A body so aerodynamic for its time that it cut wind like a buttered bullet and still looked dignified doing it. And then there's the mechanical side, the part that truly made the W126 immortal. The engines were the definition of forever. The M103 inline-six and the legendary M117 and M119 V8s were smooth, understressed, and built to handle mileage numbers that most modern cars would faint at. These weren't engines that screamed for attention, they just hummed along politely, no matter how hard you pushed them. Routine maintenance was their secret handshake. Treat them decently, and they'd last decades. But here's the thing that truly cements the W126's legend. It wasn't just built to impress, it was built to protect. Mercedes pioneered so many safety innovations here that rival automakers probably took notes with tears in their eyes, from advanced crumple zones to ABS brakes and early airbags. It was the safest luxury car of its time, and honestly, it might still outperform a few modern ones in a crash. Before we reveal the final 3, don't forget to hit the like button and comment below which classic Mercedes car you love the most. Number 3. Mercedes-Benz S-Class W140. Now imagine this, it's the late 1980s. Mercedes has just wrapped up the W126 S-Class, a global hit. Any normal company would pop champagne, slap on a new grille, and call it a day. But Mercedes engineers? No. They looked at perfection and said, let's ruin our finances to make something even better. That's how the W140 was born. Not from logic, but from obsession. Development costs? Over $1 billion. And keep in mind, this was before people even used billion in everyday conversation. It was in the engineering madness that went into everything you couldn't see. Mercedes engineers spent 6 years and over $1 billion developing it. Every panel gap was measured by hand. Every hinge, gasket, and bolt was tested like it was going to space. Even the wiring insulation was redesigned, because according to Mercedes, plastic fatigue was a thing worth losing sleep over. Even the windshield wipers had 2 motors, because apparently one was too bourgeois. The side mirrors automatically folded at high speed to reduce wind noise. And if you couldn't park a car that big, no problem. It came with tiny hydraulic antennas that popped up from the trunk to mark the corners. Because who needs sensors when you can have literal metal feelers? Everything about the W140 screamed, "We can't help ourselves." The doors were so heavy that Mercedes had to install a vacuum-assisted closing system, because otherwise half their customers would have dislocated their shoulders. The rear-view mirrors automatically folded to reduce wind noise, not because anyone complained, but because someone in Stuttgart had insomnia over it. Pop the hood and Mercedes' madness only deepened. The S-Class offered everything from tank-grade straight sixes to a 6.0-liter V12 delivering 400 horsepower perfectly disguised behind the calmest idle you'd ever hear. And that's what made it special. The W140 wasn't a car made for efficiency or profit. It was built for the kind of person who'd rather buy the best once than compromise twice. Number 2. Mercedes-Benz E-Class W124. Imagine you're an engineer at Mercedes in the mid-80s. Management walks in and says, "We need a new E-Class." And instead of asking for deadlines or budgets, you just ask one question: how indestructible do you want it? And Mercedes says, yes. Well, that's how the W124 was born. Built from 1984 to 1997, it wasn't just an E-Class, it defined the E-Class. The kind of car that reminds us that engineering used to be an art form, not a spreadsheet. Now here's the thing, the W124 was built during the golden age of Daimler-Benz, before cost-cutting became a corporate buzzword, and before Chrysler ever got involved. It was the time when engineers used to spend months thinking about things like, what's the perfect resistance for a glove box latch? Or, can we make the turn signal stalk feel more satisfying than an espresso machine lever? It was engineering insanity, and that's why the W124 still feels unshakably solid today. But it wasn't just solid, it felt solid. From the driver's seat, you got this strange sense of invincibility. Every button click was satisfying, every control heavy in that built-to-last 50 years kind of way. Even the design nailed the balance. Muscular yet graceful. Renowned Italian automotive designer Bruno Sacco gave it that boxy stance softened by rounded edges, so it looked powerful, but never brutish. That's why, parked next to today's plastic-heavy luxury cars, the W124 still carries itself with quiet confidence. And despite being overbuilt with thick, durable steel, it was surprisingly practical. Mechanics loved it, because you could take apart 70% of it using just 3 wrenches, 10mm, 13mm, and 17mm. It was like Mercedes designed it not just to last forever, but to make sure you could help it last forever. No wonder how one owner of the 1991 W124s cruised past 2 million miles with just oil and filter replacements. But what truly made the W124 legendary wasn't just how it was built, it was what lived under the hood. Mercedes offered everything from tiny 4-cylinders to the smooth as silk inline 6s. And then, of course, there were the diesels, the stuff of legend. And the 300D, powered by the OM603 and later OM606 diesel engines, became famous for running 500,000 miles with basic maintenance. Taxi drivers in Africa, the Middle East, and Europe practically worshipped them. These engines were so tough, you could only kill them with dynamite or years of neglect. Number 1. Mercedes-Benz E-Class W123. If Mercedes ever had a "we peaked here" moment, it was the W123 E-Class. This wasn't just a car. It was Mercedes-Benz looking at the rest of the automotive world and saying, "Got ya." And honestly, they didn't design this car to last a decade. They built it to survive empires. But what made it so indestructible? Let's start with the heart of the beast. The OM617 diesel engine. It made around 70 horsepower, which meant 0 to 60 in roughly sometime next week. But the thing was, it always got there. Slowly, faithfully, and with the patience of a monk. These engines were so tough that in the 1980s, humanitarian organizations used W123s in conflict zones because they knew one thing: the roads might fall apart, but the car wouldn't. And the magic wasn't just under the hood. Everything about the W123 felt like it was made by people who hated failure. The paint was thick enough to survive decades of sun. The switches clicked like precision instruments. Even the seats, which looked like something out of a German waiting room, aged better than most luxury leather does today. But here's where the W123 truly shines: simplicity. No fragile electronics, no innovations that became liabilities. You could fix almost anything on this car with a wrench and a free afternoon. And that's why, decades later, it's the darling of DIY mechanics and classic taxi drivers alike. We hope you enjoyed this video. Here's another one you won't want to miss. As always, thanks for watching.